In a South Augusta neighborhood sits a home for rent. It's not fancy, but all LaToya Goodwin needs is a safe place to call home.
The gas is seeping out of here. With me and my kids sleeping, my kids could have been dead.
There's a gas leak along with other dangers in the home. 9 days after signing a lease on the Parkwood Drive home, code enforcement tells her she has to leave.
That took 3-4 months.
3 or 4 months to save up for your first month's rent and a deposit.
And a deposit.
And now this place is going to be condemned.
Yes.
A few weeks earlier, code enforcement took these pictures of a home on Wrightsboro Road. A woman told them she put a deposit down, but found the home like this. When she came to move in, inspectors found life safety violations. Ming Lin is the owner of both condemned homes. Did you give her deposit and first month's rent back?
No, of course not. I didn't do anything wrong.
You've had a lot of violations with code enforcement over the years. Why is that?
First of all, I got a lot of properties.
More than 40 in Richmond County. 9 are currently in violation of the minimum housing and property maintenance codes. Some of these, I've gone through a lot of your properties over the years. There's some really serious violations in there.
Okay. I was able to answer every one of your questions. I'm not afraid of you tell me specifically something, and I'll address it specifically.
Let's say like the Pamplona for one. We first reported on the Pamplona Drive 2 years ago.
I was scared. I told him, I said, because in my son's room, the ceiling fan light had caught fire. We had to go up in the attic and put the fire out with a fire extinguisher.
Robin Norris called us after she found a letter from code enforcement. The letter was dated less than 2 months before she moved in. It listed a string of violations, including dangerous problems with the hot water heater and a warning that a person should not occupy the home. She called code enforcement. What Norris didn't know was she was the third tenant from Pamplona to report the house to code enforcement. Mr. Lynn promised he would make all these repairs before I moved in. And then I called code enforcement. He said he would evict me if I called code enforcement, and then you do.
Well, okay, let's put it this way. I told him, if you're going to play dirty with us, there'll be no understanding from us.
And Lynn did evict Norris. He told the court she abused the property. The same property code enforcement condemned long before Norris moved in. Still, the court orders Robin Norris to pay landlord Lynn $850. There's been a couple of cases where I've seen code enforcement come in and condemn a property. They give the date that tenant has to be out, and you still file eviction paperwork.
No, that's my right. That's my right.
And that's because Georgia is one of 8 states without a law protecting tenants from landlords who retaliate. We went through more than 100 evictions filed by landlord Ming Lin. We compared eviction dates in the magistrate's computer system with the dates of violations in code enforcement's computer system. We found more than a dozen cases where landlord Lin evicts his renters days after they report him to code enforcement.
If everything about me is wrong, why is the court cases I'm winning? Why is it I'm able to garnish them? Why is it they not all of them come sue me?
He's won more than $250,000 in court from evicting his tenants over the last 7 years. Many of his tenants will tell you it's a struggle to make ends meet.
Now, what size house? Is that 4-bedroom?
There's no money left to pay an attorney to sue the landlord who has just evicted them. So we went digging into evictions and found a pattern that allows family after family to move into homes that code enforcement deems dangerous. And code enforcement, we found, just isn't enforcing the codes. You're homeless.
Yes, right now, with 8 children.
LaToya Goodwin goes to the Homeless Resource Center for help, while her landlord of less than a month goes to the courthouse to evict her and sue her for more than $1,300. Have you filed an eviction on her?
No, not yet.
Okay, but you plan to?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Even though she was only here a week?
Well, if she doesn't do her part, the contract is 2 sides.
Code enforcement did tell her you have to leave. It's dangerous to stay here.
That's between them and code enforcement. What's between her and I is our contract, okay? That she's supposed to pay rent, and she doesn't.
Terrence Winder is the manager of code enforcement. Here's how that department is supposed to operate. Tenant calls them. They find violations. They send a certified letter to the landlord. The landlord has 30 days to make repairs or demolish. After 30 days, code enforcement re-inspects. If the landlord fails to make repairs, then the inspector asks the marshal to serve the landlord with a citation. The landlord then goes before a judge. But after pouring through hundreds of documents, News 12 found code enforcement is not always following that process, and it's putting families in danger. That's why you guys didn't go back in there 30 days later?
So once a property is vacant, there's no unsafe issue, anything that's imminent, because the tenant is not in that property.
But that would be a way of not getting it done, right?
What's that?
To evict the person.
For him?
Yeah.
It prolongs the situation. Yes, it does.
It certainly prolonged code enforcement re-inspecting Pamplona again, rented 3 times to 3 different tenants with code violations gone unchecked. So now we're at our 3rd tenant. She complains. You go in there, find all kind of issues. And some of these are pretty bad, like it's getting worse and worse as time goes on. He evicts her. It happened here too. In 2014, code enforcement wrote it's unsafe and does not need to be occupied. They did not return to re-inspect. We found at least 3 tenants lived in the unsafe home over the next 4 years. A similar story here. Last year, inspectors found electrical problems. Lynn evicted the tenant who called them. Inspectors did not come back until a new tenant called 8 months later. They find the same electrical problems in the home for a 2nd time. Had they gone back, the report shows the re-inspection is still pending. 14, 15, 16, and the case is still open. There's still not been a follow-up.
I think what we're dealing with here is that before a follow-up is made, that the tenant is always evicted.
We went door to door at homes owned by other landlords.
It's just not right. It's not right.
And found code enforcement is not always re-inspecting, even when someone does live in the home. This family made their first call to code enforcement 3 years ago.
My mom should never have to walk 3 blocks to get water. She shouldn't have to use a porta potty that he puts out in the front yard for her.
The inspector found a broken sewer line and no running water in the home. He sent a violation letter to the landlord to fix within 3 days. The inspector did not return until the family called to complain again. 2 years later, he sent a 2nd violation letter to the landlord, but yet again, the inspector didn't follow up. A year later, the family called a 3rd time about other problems in the home. This time, the inspector told them they need to vacate.
It's really awful.
The re-inspection is still pending. So you've lived here 2 years now? Just like it's still pending on this Ellis Street home.
And I've been, trying to get them fix things, and I always fix the other houses up until mine,
Bobby Laws does his best to navigate through the broken slabs on the floor with his walker. A year ago, code enforcement sent a letter to the landlord. They told him he couldn't rent the home until all of this was fixed. If the inspector came back,
that's what makes me sick right here.
he would have found Mr. Laws living here.
And we do re-inspections on these properties. That's what I'm saying.
But some of these go on for years, like before it's re-inspected.
I have to disagree on that.
Don't you think this is extremely dangerous? Because another tenant just gets put in there and it's the same, we're talking serious issues.
Yeah, it depends on what the issues are. If it talks about electrical is an unsafe issue. If the building is falling in, which these are not.
Oh, but we are talking about unsafe issues like electrical. Remember the home on Pamplona? Inspectors found a problem with the panel box in 2016. It seems that problem somehow disappeared without doing a re-inspection. Code enforcement found the home in compliance last year. A family now lives there.
The electrical was fixed.
How do you know it was fixed? Because you said you never went out there and saw it.
Yeah, we never went out and did another inspection on it, but the electrical was fixed.
Did you see receipts?
The receipts of service.
Yeah,
No,
for
we didn't have any.
How do you know it was fixed? You're just taking his word?
No, we're not taking his word. What this was something going on with the breaker system.
But back to landlord Ming Lin, who believes most of his violations are unfair. So you believe code enforcement is targeting you?
Oh, yes. No question about it.
But records show code enforcement rarely punishes him. Remember the violation process? If the landlord fails to make repairs, then the inspector asks the marshal to serve the landlord with a citation. The landlord then goes before a judge. 3 times last year, inspectors asked the marshals to serve Ming Lin with a citation, but they never did. The director of code enforcement spoke to me this morning and asked me to hold off on these citations at this time. Director of code enforcement told me to hold off on these citations at this time. Same thing here. Why would you do that when you know these are some of these properties that have some major issues?
Well, I don't know if that was me.
We took our findings to the marshal.
When you see those cases like that, it's just somebody's taking advantage of the system.
More accurately, the lack of a system.
Code enforcement and the marshal's office operate off 2 different databases. So all we have is just eviction paperwork. We got an eviction to go out and serve for this address. We have no idea of what code enforcement violations until they call us and let us know that they want us to issue the citation for it.
3 systems in place to protect families from unsafe properties, and none with a complete picture of what is happening over and over and over again. Do you agree some people's lives have been in danger?
To that point, no.
Electrical issues, carbon monoxide leaks, structural problems.
The gas is seeping out in here. With me and my kids sleeping, my kids could have been dead.
We showed you family after family.
My mom should never have to walk 3 blocks to get water.
Living in unfit and even dangerous homes.
And we do re-inspections on these properties. That's what I'm saying.
But some of these go on for years, like before it's re-inspected.
I have to disagree on that.
But after going through hundreds of records, we found code enforcement is not always following up on homes they find in violation.
I was aware they had problems, not to this magnitude.
Commissioner Ben Hassan first became aware of this a few months ago when he met a young woman living in a home with a gas leak. What he didn't know at the time, her landlord has a history of leasing homes with code violations, and the department that's supposed to make sure he's making the repairs is not always doing that.
Very disappointed in terms of some of the not follow-up that code enforcement has not done. And then to find out at the end of the day that our directors in many instances discouraged them from following through.
Commissioner Hassan believes the department needs oversight, and the district attorney agrees.
Most importantly, though, I think that there needs to be someone with a little bit of independence overseeing that department, meaning that, you know, they're either accountable to the voters or are just a little bit more accountable to the commission.
Natalie Payne believes the marshal's office should be in charge because they're already partly involved. They serve code enforcement citations and eviction notices. Would you be willing to take over it?
I'm a team player. Whatever needs to be done to make Augusta better, then that's what I'm willing to do.
But that would take commissioners amending the city's code to allow the marshal to take over. Commissioner Hassan doesn't believe that is necessary, at least yet.
Put the utility companies on notice that there's no service and needs to be provided at this particular residence because this property has been condemned.
City code also gives code enforcement the power to cite problem landlords, which would allow a judge to fine landlords up to $1,000 a day per violation.
Let's hold these landlords accountable. If you own a lot of property in Rich County, if you own one property in Rich County, you renting out for profit, and make sure that house is up to standard before you put somebody in that house.
But until the city holds code enforcement accountable, families might continue to fall, quite literally,
That's what makes me sick right here.
through the cracks. This one goes to show you it doesn't matter the size of your wallet or the level of education you have. You can fight and you can win. We found LaToya Goodwin in a hard place.
We're missing parts of the breaker box.
In more than one way.
He told me that if I go and have it inspected, that he was going to evict me.
And it happened after she called code enforcement. Her landlord of 2 weeks filed to evict her.
Let's put it this way. I told him, if you're going to play dirty with us, There will be no understanding from us.
Our investigation found tenant after tenant evicted and even sued after calling code enforcement.
If everything about me is wrong, why is the court cases I'm winning? Why is it I'm able to garnish them? Why is it they not all of them come sue me?
We poured through dozens of evictions. In all of the cases we found, landlord Ming Lin has won every time until our investigation aired.
As far as I can tell, you're the first one that has ever won an eviction dealing with this landlord. And he's been a landlord here for decades. How does that make you feel?
Well, it makes me feel like Georgia Legal Services Program is doing a good job in serving its community. And it shows that the Eviction Prevention Project is really having teeth, and that we can really enact some change in the community.
Just this month, a judge ruled in favor of LaToya Goodwin. Kaylin Barkley is her attorney. He won on the grounds Ming Lin failed to keep the rental in good repair to the extent it was life-threatening. So much so that code enforcement condemned it.
What's the feeling you get working, especially when you succeed in a case like this? I mean, just personally.
Well, it motivates me. It tells me that what I'm doing is good work.
Barkley began specifically working to prevent evictions in Richmond County less than a year ago. It's a new position at Georgia Legal Services, one much needed in Richmond County.
And that usually stems into a whole cycle of evictions, homelessness, and evictions again.
That happened to Goodwin. She's one of more than 100 tenants he represented in eviction cases against private landlords over the last year.
What would you say to them?
I would say don't give up hope. Reach out. There are organizations across town and across the state and federally that are willing to help you.
Even when the odds and the dollar seem stacked against you.
Goodwin did win that eviction, but the judge denied their counterclaim for $15,000. But the fight isn't over yet. They're appealing.